Hello there, it is Jo from Minerva, and today we're going to do a fitting tutorial on princess seams. Specifically, today is about a fuller bust, so if you need to make a full bust adjustment, I'll show you how to do that on a princess seam. I'll also show you another couple of ways which you might be able to make a small adjustment if you just need to make the bust a little bit fuller. If you know you always need to make a full bust adjustment on items, not just princess seam ones, but darted ones as well, then it's a good idea to make a princess seam toile. So choose a pattern with a princess seam, make a toile of it and try and get the princess seam fit right, and then you will know that you can use that fit throughout other patterns. Most patterns are drafted for a B cup at the very best. Sometimes indie patterns draft to a C cup. So you will be thinking about how you're going to accommodate that different body shape. Let's start small. The first thing you can do is you can just let out the seam allowances. So seam allowances are 1.5 centimetres for a reason, and that is you'll have a little bit of fitting room in your bust seams. So it might just be, if you're making a small change, that you can use the seam allowances to get the bust fit that you need. If you know you're going to need a larger bust adjustment, then you might need to move up to the sort of next stage, which is to do a tissue fit of the paper pieces. So if you pin the pieces at the shoulders, above the bust and the waist seam, and then you can try the tissue fit on, and you can see how far apart between the notches around about that the tissue is opening out. You can measure that, and that will be a good starting point for how much you need to adjust a princess seam. When measuring for a princess seam, you need to measure your upper bust, so that's under your arm here where it's soft, and you need to measure your full bust, and you need to take the one measurement away from the other measurement, and that will tell you how much you need to change your bust by. But of course you then need to divide that in half, because one side will take one adjustment and one side will take out the other adjustment. So whatever distance you find you need to change by, you need to divide that by 2. Once you've got the amount that you want to change your bust by, you can then start to do your bust adjustments. The first one that I'm going to show you today is just how to move the fullness of a princess seam, because it might be that when you put your dress on, it's just too tight at the top, or the fullness is at the bottom and you just need it raising up a little bit. So the first one is just how to move the fullness. To change just the fullness, you do it the same as if you want to move a bust dart up and down. So you cut out the whole area where the fullness occurs, which is between the 2 notches. The notches are included inside the rectangle. And you cut out the whole area that creates the fullness. And now you can move that up or down. You'll need a piece of paper underneath. So that you can create your space and true up your seams again. So let's say we want to move our fullness down because we've got a fuller bust, and when we made our toile it was too tight across the top of our bust. So if we move it down by 1 centimetre, and then we can true up the seams. When you true up the top part, you need to grade it in. Because if you grade that out, you're just putting the fullness back again. I mean, if you want that fullness at the top as well, you can do that too. But what you're trying to do is move the wider part down so that the hollow at the top of your bust is still there. You also need to true out the bottom. So that's the principle of moving a bust notch princess seam down or up. If you want to add more to your overall bust width, then you'll need to do a full bust adjustment, which is coming up next. Now that you've made this adjustment in the side front piece, you also need to do the same in the front piece so that your notches match up again. And that is how you move the fullness from the notches up or down, depending on where you need the room for your bust shape. If you don't think any of those suggestions so far are going to work for you, then you might need to go down the road of a full bust adjustment. Let's see how we're going to do that. And the first thing you'll need to do is to know where your bust apex is and how much you want to change your bust size by. Once you've taken your measurements, you've taken a high bust measurement and a full bust measurement and found the difference between them, you will know how much you want to adjust your pattern by. So you're wanting to adjust this section here. You can also make a toile of your garment, that also helps. I've traced off the pattern and I have a side front, and this is the centre front. This is cut on the fold, so this opens out and this would be the neck. And we're going to work on the side front first. You will need the piece that you're working on to have the grain line on, and you need to mark all of the seam allowances because we want to change the piece that's touching our body, which is the measurements between the seam allowances, and we need to create little hinges so that we can manipulate the pattern. The first thing you need to find out is where your bust apex is. So from a tissue fit, you will need to mark on the pattern where your bust apex is, and that's the fullest part of your bust. So that is normally in the middle of these two notches. It might be a little bit lower if you have quite a heavy bust, then your bust apex might be a bit lower down. So let's just say here for the purposes of the video. We're going to draw some lines that all meet to that bust apex. We're going to mark some lines on our pattern using this apex as our reference point. So I'm going to do them in different lines, each colour, so that I can reference them. So the first one goes from about 1 inch up from the waist to the apex. The next one is going to go about 1/4 of the way into our arm sike. This princess seam goes into the arm sike, but if your princess seam goes up to the shoulder, so your end point will be up here, just find about 1/4 the way along the arm sike. And the next one is going to go about 1/3 of the way down the side seam. So this straight edge here is the side seam. So from the bust point, I'm going to go out to the side seam. So we've made 3 marks that all head towards the bust apex. We're going to cut these lines, but we don't want our pattern piece to fall apart. So our first one, we're going to cut up to the bust apex and then out to the armhole. But we don't want to go all the way through there, we want to keep that secure. We then snip the seam allowance, which now allows our pattern to pivot. From the side seam, we're going to head towards the bust apex and leave a little bit of paper so that we've got a pivot point here and a pivot point here. We now need some spare paper so that we can fill in the gaps. I would like to add an overall 2 inches to my bust on this pattern piece, so I'm going to add 1 inch on my pattern piece because this will be duplicated for the other bust piece. So I'll get 1 inch on here, 1 inch on the other one when it's sewn up as a garment. And we're looking for parallel lines along here. We don't want this to be like this, where I've got a funny shape here. I'm trying to keep this gap here with a parallel gap. So we'll need sticky tape. I find it helpful to just anchor that so that I know that that is on my grain line. So I'm going to be adding an inch here. And when I've made that shape, I'm just going to stick a piece of tape down. So I've made a 1 inch adjustment. I'm a little bit short here now, so I need to add another little piece along the bottom. Because adding fullness to the bust, so your bust is taking up more of your body room, so you need to lengthen the bodice back down to the right length. So we've opened up by 1 inch and we've adjusted the body length. By opening up this side of the pattern, we have created this large dart here. So now our side seam is the wrong shape and rather unusual looking. So we are going to use the top line, which is the line we drew to our apex in the first place. Just going to take that down so it doesn't move around. And we're looking for an extension line that runs all the way through our pattern piece. I'm going to take the rest down so that it doesn't move while I do this large cut. So now we can cut along this line. Hinge at the bust apex and close up the side seam, and you can see now we've got our shape back again. We have now opened up the pattern where we want it to be, so we have added some extra fullness onto the bust curve. We can pop a piece of paper under there. We can true up any seams, so we haven't got any sort of jog there. We've got a little gap here, so we can redraw that curve back in. And we're ready to cut out our pattern piece. The final thing to do is to make sure that our waist pieces that go below here will fit along this bodice piece. So we've added this space here. So measure between the seam lines, not from the edge. So we've added 2.8 centimetres. So we need to take 2.8 centimetres off the waistline. So we're going to take that off this seam line here. So that this piece that we've added is taken off at the side seam. Before you're really sure about that, you might want to just double check that on your toile. If you've got a fuller bust, you might need to go back to the waist measurement of the pattern, or you might need a little bit of extra room in your waist anyway. So make sure that you're fitting your waist at the same time that you're fitting your bust. So now I can add back on the seam allowance and cut my pattern. What I added in here has been taken out here, so this space between the new seam allowance and the seam allowance for the princess seam will still fit in my skirt pieces. But do check that first, that you don't need to adjust that at all, because you don't have to take that much off if you don't need it. If you need it on the waist, keep it there. If you find when you toile that your fullness that you've added is too low, then when you make your red line, which is your side seam line when you first draw it, you can make that more perpendicular to the grain line, and then it will change where the fullness is. So the one that goes from the apex to the side is the one that will change where this fullness arrives. Obviously we want this curved shape now to fit into our front bodice piece, and it doesn't anymore. If we match up the notches, we've got quite a difference. So we want to put this significant piece we've added here, this length, and this length we've added here into this seam so that the one piece fits into the other piece. So you could either draw a straight line on a piece of scrap paper, or I'm using the straight edge of the roll because I know that that's really nice and straight, and I've stuck the top part of the pattern down just so that it's not moving around. And the first thing that I want to try and accommodate is how much I've opened this bust fullness up, and I'm going to add that into this curve. So between the notches is where I'm going to try and ease in more fabric, but I can't ease that much more in now between the same space as last time. So I'm going to measure how much I opened the bust out by. I'm not going to measure this outer edge. I need to make sure that I'm measuring where the actual seam meets. So that is 1.5 centimetres. So the first place I need to add fullness on the bodice front is between the notches. And I need to make sure that I'm keeping this centre front still nice and straight. The second place I added length to the body, I need to add length to the bodice front. Again, measuring the seam line, it is 5 centimetres. So I'm going to measure 5 centimetres onto my paper to accommodate here. So when we match it up and we put those notches back together, our body lengths are both longer, our bust curves still match round notch to notch but with a bit of fullness, and we might have just a little bit of truing up to do in the arm side. Cut out your pattern piece. And tape everything down. So that is how you do a princess seam full bust adjustment. It's quite involved, but once you've done it once and you've made a toile, keep that toile. If you make it out of a bed sheet or scrap fabric, you can keep it and keep trying it on. As time goes by, you might find you need to change it as you get older, but if you've got your pieces, keep them with your toile, and then you can always go back and double check. I hope some of those suggestions are helpful to you. I don't have the answers for every body size. You'll need to do that and find out your own answers from making your toile and taking your own measurements. We would love to see what you have been making over at Minerva, so do make an account with us, share your makes, and you'll get lots of support and love from our sewing community. You'll also get lots of inspiration from what other people have been choosing and making. You can join the craft club as well, which means that you will get discounts and promotions and offers throughout the year. You can also check out some more of our tutorials over on our YouTube channel and here at Minerva for sew-alongs, fabric pairings, fabric focus, tips and tricks. There's so much to see and so much to inspire your hobby. Thank you very much for watching. Do call again soon.